There's been a new world record out for the autonomous period in the DECODE season. Let's take a look. How important is it to make sure you're getting those pattern points and taking that time to index? I'm Coach Pratt, and I'm teaching robotics and design for over a decade now. And today we're going to take a look at a couple things for the FTC season. We'll take a look at a really unique indexer that I haven't seen up to this season. We'll take a look at some FTC fun. We'll analyze a pretty intense match, and then we're going to take a look at some world record autonomous strategies that teams are putting up, because it is some interesting patterns we've been seeing and some more confirmation of some things we've been talking about this season that we're going to get into. So first things first, let's take a look at just a really unique intake here from 27019 Solar Storm. And I just want to show off their indexer here because I think it's a really unique design, particularly because it's a vertical region that runs the robot straight up. But instead, what there are, and it's really hard to tell from the video about what it is, but it looks like there's either some sort of linear rod, whether it is a belt, whether it is another wheel. But you see right now it is green, purple, purple, but there is some sort, it looks like it's a belt transfer now that I see this. So there's maybe an arm that kicks it onto a belt that then pushes them into this sort of extra section, where then it allows them to launch and to be able to do that pattern that it is that they want to do. Because I believe in this case, it is purple, green, purple. So they can launch one, move it over, and then launch it in again. Super slick design. I really like kind of seeing some of that creative engineering, because we've seen a lot of teams have this kind of vertical setup, and to be able to have this little kick over, be able to hit that index is some really creative engineering out of this team. And I like seeing it. Next up, I wanted to highlight here from the FRC Pikes Peaks Regional. There were 4 FTC teams that participated in this, and it's just really fun to be able to take a FTC team and throw it out into the actual FRC field. I believe this is their human player zone, and of course we got some fouls running up. I don't think there's any autonomous running at this point, but we do see there are a couple robots that are capable to actually hit artifacts into the rebuilt hub for this season. So just some fun things to be able to show off. I would definitely encourage you to go take a look at this match. It is 4 hours and 22 minutes into the Pikes Peak Regional. I'll leave it down in the description down below. But it's always fun to see some creative things happen, as well as some more collaboration happen between FRC and FTC. I always love seeing it. Next up here, we've got a pretty high-level match from the Iowa Championships in the Gold Division. This is playoffs match 11. And we're just going to do some quick analysis here because I want to take a look at some of the defense strategies that are happening inside of this. Now, some of our autonomous is starting to get some pretty impressive shots, and it goes back to that importance we've been talking about all season about just how critical it is to make sure that when you fire artifacts in, that they actually make their way into that goal. So of the amount of shots that were actually fired in this season, or at least this time, you end up with only 10 or 11 artifacts actually making it in during that autonomous period. Now we've got a robot down here, 10435. And I'm going to double check. I'm pretty sure this is the circuit breakers, FTC Scout. That is 10435. I believe we looked at these guys last week. Yes, the circuit breakers last week. And they seem to be a relatively well-known team in that they've got a robot that does not have a turret, but instead of the entire robot is deciding to shift. And there's been some conversation going on about whether that robot rotating or not is able to still perform at a very high level. And I think that this is a great match that does go to show that Team 10435 is still capable of having some really solid driving to be able to rotate it. Now, we'll have to take a look at is down in this bottom triangle here. And what ends up happening is that because the Blue Alliance is not capable of aligning themselves on if another robot gets in the way, what's happening is that a lot of the time they end up just scooping forward, taking some close shots, and then moving on from that point. Like for instance, we see right here, they're not able to do a self-align as that other robot is in that way. So kudos to the Red Alliance here, and that is 26192 for playing in on that defense and making sure they're pushing against that team. But again, that goes back to the importance of just having a rather fast drivetrain and be able to move yourselves around. I think that as far as defense being played is pretty important this season, because we saw that this Red Alliance came in to be able to hit this Blue Alliance and ended up making half of their shots, end up moving off. So what I think seems to be more the case here is just talking to the importance of having those move while shoot algorithms. Because let's go back a little bit to where this, let's watch in the far triangle here. And let's see, as this robot gets pushed out of the way, it ends up with only one of those two artifacts actually going in. So it goes to go show that importance, maybe not necessarily the auto alignment of that robot that may be the important key, as it is the perhaps shifting hood. And as you are a fixed robot, we see things like that, particularly we start getting to things like premier events and world championships. Despite being able to move into another spot, if you are a robot that has to self-align, it may be more advantageous for you to spend that time in that close triangle because you're far less likely to have little angle points end up really changing your shots. Particularly because when we're back here, of course, any angle deviations end up causing a much larger section in the back. So depending on what sort of mechanisms you have, should be pretty important. And something else that's I think is going to be more important as we get into that world stage is your ability to your robot to shoot while it's getting hit by another robot. A couple of ways I've seen some teams solve against this is a move while shooting algorithm. That can be a really useful way of being able to make sure you're adapting angle to the hood. If you are just modulating the RPM of your flywheel and not changing an angle of your launch trajectory, you may not be able to adjust in time based on robots hitting you quickly. However, if you have a quick enough motor or servo to be able to change that back angle of your hood, so when you get hit and you're moved out of the way, you're able to compensate for those. That might end up being some of that defining factor when it comes into there. Next up, let's take a look at some autonomous. We have a team from Revamped. I'm not sure how they describe their name or how they pronounce their name, but they've got a solo world record here. Again, I've talked about solo records before. Really take these things with a grain of salt because there's no defense being played. There is a perfect artifact selection on the field you have. You are able to pick these things up wherever you want. So really good for just some general driver practice, but not really a real scenario. So again, I don't want to talk down the work that this team is doing, but I don't want to talk up as much as, saying a solo world record. It is very much a niche thing that doesn't necessarily apply over to a competition. But what I want to highlight from this team is I think they've got a pretty slick autonomous strategy. And the question is going to be whether this autonomous strategy really plays out and just how critical this autonomous strategy actually is. If your teammate does not have an autonomous as you're moving into these higher level regional events, this will be a very beneficial strategy. So they take off the first three, they fire quite quickly. They've got really high throughput. All three go in, excellent. They end up loading another three, quite high throughput again, and then they do a quick load again here to be able to pick these things up. Now the strategy shifts and they launch in three rather slowly to be able to ensure that they are still getting those index points or those pattern points to be able to properly index those. And they're still within that full 30 seconds. And I really like seeing this strategy out of the team because they're getting pretty darn close to maximum points that they can in autonomous. They have 6 classified at the start, plus an additional 9 classified. So they have 15 classified with a full pattern point of 18 points on the pattern and a leave at the end there. So what is that? It's 15 times 3, that's 45, plus an 18, that gets us up to 63, plus another 3, that's 66 points on autonomous. Really solid work. Maybe double check my math there, maybe it's not 100%. But really solid work on that. I like being able to slow down their autonomous to make sure that they're indexing correctly. And then let's talk about the world record that just came up over the weekend here from teams 21227. It was at the Northern California and it was 8404 Quicksilver. And this was, I believe, the Red Alliance to take a look at here. So let's take a look at the Red Alliance side of the field. And keep in mind, this is the current world record for the autonomous at 112 points total. So there are 2 artifacts that end up getting missed. There's 3 that actually end up going in there. Excellent work. And something we've been seeing a lot of, there's another one bouncing out there. And something we're seeing a lot of this season is just opening up the gate and just getting really high throughput, not really bothering much to do an index. And one of those didn't actually count. So there's 4 that's missing from the FAR robot, that's 5 that's missing from the robot, and that's 6 that actually end up missing and not actually going through in that. That's 7 of the number of shots that they have. So let's go back and let's see. So they end up with a full hopper. So there are 21 there are 29 total scored artifacts. Really, really solid work to get that across two teams. That is 14, 15 artifacts going in. 7 missed overall is 36. Could have been a potential 36 artifacts. Now, that again goes back to the importance of, well, yes, artifacts need to stay in. Let's talk about something important, Coach Brad. And yeah, I know. So 29 coming in, pretty critical, but also speaking to just how perhaps impractical it is to get those pattern points with so many teams being able to face in. And this comes back to the idea of ranking points. This is a great strategy when it comes to the playoffs, because at that point, the ranking points of the pattern don't really seem to make a lot of sense. And the reason I say that is, let's take a look at the match records across. The first place autonomous has 12 out of possible 18 points. And then the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 world record autonomouses that are all above 90 points. Or sorry, actually, they're all above 100 points, but all above 90 points in for those artifacts are below 8 for the amount of artifacts come in. So if you were to have a completely random chance, you would expect you'd get at least 1.5 of those artifacts. So you would expect you to get at least 1.5, 3, 4.5, on average between 6 to 10 points, just by going completely random. So robots that are really focusing on high throughput really seem to be winning the autonomouses, particularly with those high scoring points. Now, the question remains about just how important is it to make sure you're getting those pattern points and taking that time to index. In my opinion, unless you are on an edge point for whether you need a few more ranking points to be able to push yourself up in the score above another team, it seems to me like it's more worthwhile to just forego indexing, ensure you have 9 full artifacts in that ramp before the end, and then just going with your best average point, because on average you get 2 points for a correct pattern, but a fully classified non-overflow artifact gives you 3 points versus just 2 on that artifact. Plus an overflow, even if you do have that full ramp, an overflow still scores you 1. So it's still really beneficial to be moving the artifacts through. It also moves you towards that artifact ranking point as well, which is likely going to be higher for Worlds. I'm not sure, at least at the time of the recording, whether the team update has released a new ranking points for those awards or not. Actually, I'm going to check that right now. Just check, at least at the time of this recording, they have not released what the total score needs to be for the amount of artifacts for the World Championships. So I'm curious on your thoughts. Do you think that it makes more sense to make sure that you end your autonomous with a full gate and make sure you just score a couple overflows so you have more likelihood of being able to score that pattern point? Or do you think it makes sense to still continue to do some of those indexing? I think one of the challenges with the indexing is you end up having to, just like we saw with that auto, you really have to slow down those shot spells to get this in. Plus, you have your partner that you need to factor in as well. So even though you can throw things in quite quickly, even teams that have high throughput to be able to get that indexing, you need to spend that time for those balls to bounce around inside of that goal before they're actually able to properly index out. And at least from what I've been seeing and from what I can see looking at the world records here, you have to come down to the 10th world record on autonomous to be able to get a full auto pattern points. And then you come down again, and teams that are getting close near is the 43rd. So the vast majority of these really high scoring, in the top 50 autonomouses in the world, only 2 of them are even within spitting's distance of actually hitting that full pattern points. And I think that's a good enough argument, in my opinion, to go that pattern points don't really seem to matter too much when it comes to winning those autonomouses. Now, that does change when it comes to things like ranking points, but I'd be really surprised if first major ranking points have to get 18 full pattern points for both sides. So a 36 full pattern to be able to get that ranking point. And if they do, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a good chunk of teams that don't even bother trying to hit that, just because the amount of time that it takes to slow down your score to be able to get that indexing is not worth it, in my opinion, for those total points. So I'm curious on your thoughts. Let me know your opinion on that kind of auto strategy in the comments down below. If you have a match or something, an interesting robot or interesting mechanism, you can consider submitting that in the FTC Fridays submission form down below. And as always, best of luck out there this FTC season.